Hello and welcome to Crochet with Curio. In our last couple of videos we showed you how to create granny squares, and in this tutorial we're going to show you how to join them together. There are two main ways to join granny squares together. One is by sewing them, and we'll show you a couple of methods of how to do that, and the other is by crocheting them together. Now each granny square has a right and a wrong side, and the easiest way to see which is the right and the wrong side is that it will tend to curl up towards the right side. Now we're going to fasten them together, right sides facing each other. We're just going to place the granny square so that it matches all the way along. Now you would normally use a length of yarn the same colour as your granny square so you wouldn't be able to see the stitches, but for the sake of this tutorial I'm using a contrasting yarn so you can actually see where I am sewing. So I'm joining it at the corner, and I'm just going to tie a knot just as if we were going to fasten on a new colour. I'm going to start by sewing in between the treble stitches, and we'll need to just make sure that we're going through the same gap on both of the squares. Just going to move the straggler out of the way, and we can weave that in later. So through the gap between the trebles on both granny squares, and then through the chain space as well. And then we're on to our next group of 3, so we need to make sure that the needle goes in between the stitches. You don't want to get your stitches too tight, but then again you want it to hold together quite well. So just keep an eye on your tension there. Then we're back to a chain space. So straight through the centre of the chain space. And then back to the next group of 3. Now if you had more granny squares, you would continue doing the next row. However, all we need to do here is to weave the ends in. The second method is known as the invisible join and relies on us using only the back loops of each granny square. So I'm going to start in this corner, but I'm going to go through just the back loop there of that one and the corresponding back loop of that one. And again I'm just going to fasten a knot and we'll weave the straggler in later. So then we go to the next stitch, and again it's just the back loops that we're looking for. So that's both loops. We're just going in the back loop of this one and the second loop in the next one. and work our way along, just like that. So on the front granny square, the back loop is the loop closest to us, which is that one, and on the furthest granny square, it's the loop furthest away, which is that one. You can see straight away it's a much neater stitch. But it is more time consuming. But if I open it out, you can see it's almost an invisible join. So the first method of crocheting them together is using double crochet. So we're going to put the granny squares together with the right sides facing. And using the yarn and the hook you use to create the granny square, we're just going to join on, just as we would if we were changing colour. We're joined on in a corner, we're going to pull our yarn through, fasten it on, and then do a double crochet. And we're going to go in between each stitch, making sure that we're through the right stitch on the granny square on both sides, and we're simply going to crochet along with a double crochet, putting one double in each chain space and one between each treble. This is a popular method of joining granny squares together, primarily because it's quick. So between the trebles, just taking time to ensure that you're going between the same stitches on both granny squares. When you get to the end, you would just fasten off as normal and weave in your ends. Now, because we're using a contrasting yarn, you can see where the stitches are. But if you use the same yarn as you used to create your granny squares, that would be virtually invisible. However, there is quite a prominent ridge on the other side. Some people like this and use it in the design of their blanket. The second method of joining granny squares together starts off the same, so with the right sides facing, we're going to join our yarn, just as if we were going to join yarn to change colour. We're going to slip stitch, chain 3, and slip stitch into the chain space, chain another 3, slip stitch into the next chain space, chain 3, slip stitch into the next chain space, chain 3, and slip stitch into the corner. Now, as you can see, this is quite a quick and easy method. And it's quite a neat way of fastening together the more lacy granny squares. The next method of joining granny squares is known as join as you go, and this involves adding a border, usually of a contrasting colour. So take your first square and add just another round of the granny stripe. Now, to join your second square, we're going to start the border. I find the best place is somewhere in the middle. So just as if we were adding another round of a granny square. So we're going to chain 3 to make a false treble, 2 more trebles into that hole, and chain 1 to get over to the next chain space. 3 trebles, and chain 1 to get into the corner. Normally in a corner we'll do 3 trebles, chain 3 and 3 more trebles. We're going to start by doing the first 3 trebles. Instead of doing the chain 3, we're just going to chain 1, and then we're going to take our next one and just slip stitch into the corner. So that's joined it at the corner. We're going to chain 1, so we've got a chain 1, a slip stitch and a chain 1, which replaces our chain 3, and do 3 trebles back into the corner. Normally we would chain 1 to get over to this chain space, but instead of doing that, we're just going to slip stitch into the chain space and then just carry on with the 3 trebles as normal. Again, we would normally chain 1, but we're going to go into the border and slip stitch and continue with our 3 trebles. Again, instead of chaining 1, we're just going to slip stitch through the chain space in the border of the other granny square and continue like that until we get back to the corner. Now in the corner it often looks as though you've gone slightly wrong, but it will work out in the end. Again, we should chain 1 to get to the corner, so we're going to slip stitch into this chain space here, do our first 3 trebles into the corner, chain 1, and then slip stitch into the corner of the border of the granny square behind, chain 1, that makes our 3, and then 3 trebles into the corner. So as you can see, I'm just about to now continue round with the border as if it was just another row on a granny square. So I'll meet you when we get back around the other side. As you can see, we've worked our way around. I've done 3 treble crochets into that chain space, so I'm just going to chain 1 and I'm going to slip stitch into the top of the chain 3 and fasten off. So you can see that makes a very neat join on both sides, and it's very much in keeping with the granny style pattern. It's Very similar for the next square. Just start as if you were doing another round of the granny square. Chain 1 to move over to the corner, put 3 trebles into the corner, chain 1 and slip stitch into the corner of the border, chain 1 to complete our chain of 3 and 3 trebles back into the same corner to finish off our corner. And then we're going to slip stitch through the next chain space and 3 trebles into the next space on our granny square. Now so far it's exactly the same as we did before when we were drawing the first square. The only difference comes when you get to the corner. So we're back to the corner, so it's 3 trebles. And normally it would be chain 3, but this time it's going to be chain 1. We're going to slip stitch, but this time we're going to slip stitch into the diagonal corner, not the corner of the one that we've just joined to. And it is important to ensure that these slip stitches are quite tight. We're going to continue back with 3 trebles into our corner. So here we're going to be joining our next piece into an inside corner. This bit tends to confuse a lot of people, but all you need to remember is just carry on as you were before, but then you work your slip stitch into the diagonal corner, not these, the diagonal one. Just as before, we've started doing a border. I've come to a corner, so I'll do my first 3 trebles. I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to slip stitch into this corner, chain 1, and work 3 trebles back into the corner of the granny square. And then 3 trebles into the corner, chain 1, and then we're going to slip stitch into this diagonal corner here. The reason we're going into the diagonal is it just makes it a little bit tighter. We'll chain 1 and work another 3 trebles back into the corner. As you can see, we're now working down onto the next side. So we worked our 3 trebles, we're going to slip stitch into this space here and work 3 trebles into the next chain space. So there we have the finished piece. All that's left is to even any loose ends, and as you can see, it's a seamless join on both sides. This is especially good if you've got different coloured granny squares that you want to join together and give a cohesive look. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.